George Miller, the Oscar-winning director of the Mad Max series, was asked what was his inspiration for The Road Warrior. He stated it was the 1975 movie A Boy and His Dog. While A Boy and His Dog was more of a cynical, dark-humored film, The Road Warrior was a similar idea, only made to be more commercially appealing. The movie was based on a novella written by famous sci-fi author Harlan Ellison. The novella follows an alternate timeline in the US, one where JFK isn't assassinated, and the Cold War eventually develops into World War III. A peace treaty was signed in 1982, but in 2007, World War IV erupts and the planet is nuked into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The story revolves around Vic and his telepathic dog Blood as they travel across the wastelands in the year 2024. The novella was written to show humans were reduced to the level of animals, and Blood, a dog, was the last remnant of humanity. He had a symbiotic relationship with Vic that they needed each other to survive. Blood needed Vic to help him find food, and Vic needed Blood to help him find women. Ellison said that after the apocalypse, the three most important things in the world would be food, weapons, and women. He wanted to show how awful the future would be by having women reduced to a commodity. If you haven't seen the movie, I highly urge you watch it first and then watch this video. You'll have a greater appreciation for it if you do. The novella was printed as part of a collection, The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World. The novella won a Nebula and was also nominated for a Hugo Award. Shortly after being published, Ellison was approached by numerous studios wanting to adapt the story. Most wanted to make it into a film, but one studio wanted to make it into a TV series. Ellison had a meeting with a group of producers that was going well until one of them mentioned how they would animate the dog's mouth. Ellison, a notorious hothead, stormed out of the office, never to return. During this time, an actor named L.Q. Jones, who had mostly done westerns, was getting into directing. He did one film in 1964 called The Devil's Bedroom and was deciding what to do next. In the early 1970s, one of his business associates gave him a copy of the compilation and told him to read A Boy and His Dog. Jones loved it and knew this was the movie he wanted to make. The problem was he was fairly new to directing and his production company didn't have a lot of money. He nervously called Ellison and told him, "I want to make A Boy and His Dog into a picture." Ellison replied, "So the hell does everyone else in town, and they know what they're doing." Ellison was tired of all the fancy producers with no passion or understanding trying to buy the rights to his book. So much so he'd become jaded. More jaded than normal. However, something clicked with him while talking with Jones. He was honest, charming, and didn't give him any bullshit. Ellison also knew him from his work with Sam Peckinpah and liked him. He asked him if he did the movie if he would animate the dog's mouth. Jones said absolutely not, and that was all Ellison needed to hear. After meeting and talking further, Ellison agreed to write the script for the film for $200. He'd written hundreds of books, TV shows, movies, and so on, so he thought this wouldn't be particularly difficult. While Ellison sat down to write the script, Jones went off for 3 weeks to work on another project. When he returned, he discovered Ellison had only written 13 pages. For the first time in his life, he was suffering from writer's block. Ellison was going through some rough personal issues at the time, which made it difficult for him to concentrate. The two got into a shouting match over the script, and Jones threatened him with the biggest thing he could. He said he'd write the script if Ellison couldn't. This hit Ellison hard. He was notorious for having a clause in his contracts that said not a single written word of his in a script was to be changed. He had a meeting over the 1966 film The Oscar, and when he discovered a producer changed numerous things he wrote, he tried to throw him out of a 7-story window. Ellison cringed at a cowboy writing the script, so he asked for more time. With that time, he was only able to produce 4 more pages. Jones then took the reins and spent the next year writing the script. Ellison's novella was loaded with dialogue, so he took the lines word for word and only changed the things that wouldn't translate to film. Jones decided in order to retain the feel of the novella, they shot mostly in Coyote Dry Lake in Barstow, California. The Down Under was sets in other locations. A young Don Johnson was cast to play Vic. They auditioned over 300 women for the part of Quilla before seeing Susan Benton. Jones said he knew she was perfect for the role once he saw her eyes. Legendary actor Jason Robards was hired to play her father, and Tim McIntyre was hired to play the voice of Blood. While in early pre-production, they received word that actor James Cagney was willing to come out of retirement to do the voice of Blood. While this would have been huge for the production, Jones decided against it because Cagney's voice was too recognizable. Blood's voice needed to be distinguished but anonymous. It had to be perfect or the movie wouldn't work. The entire thing hinged on the audience buying into the idea of a telepathic dog. McIntyre also sang the theme to the film. Blood was played by an incredibly well-trained dog named Tiger. There was a rumor this was the dog from the Brady Bunch, but that's not true. They started filming in 1974. The first 9 minutes of the film were what Ellison wrote, including the most brutal line in the movie.
Hell, they didn't have to cut her. Just Could have been used 2 or 3 more times.
They were filming on a very tight budget, so they hid whatever they couldn't afford. The way they explained the lack of buildings was that the entire city was buried under tons of mud. The surface dwellers were digging down in order to get supplies. They emptied 3 junkyards of their garbage to use for sets. They dressed the gymnasium to make it look like it was turned into a hospital for survivors. The entrance point of the Down Under was filmed in the Goldstone tracking station. Jones had permission to film there, but another movie shot right before them messed the place up. Even though they had nothing to do with the other production, they refused to let them in. Jones begged, and they allowed them to shoot there for 2 hours before kicking them out. In the book, the Down Under was described as an enormous technical structure, so they needed those shots. Once underground, Vic made his way to what the inhabitants called Topeka. They didn't light the ceilings to help give the feeling of being underground. For the extras, they brought in many of the families from the local military base. For the brides, they couldn't afford all those dresses, so they asked the mothers at the military base to loan their daughters their wedding dresses. The park scenes were shot over 2 nights in a park in Ventura. While filming, they frequently asked Ellison if he wanted to come to the set. He refused. When the movie switches to the Down Under, it's almost a genre swap. It shifts so quickly, Jones was worried he might lose the audience. Thankfully, because of how weird it is and how it was handled, it keeps the audience engaged, which is no small feat. The makeup the underground dwellers wear was referred to as the Babes in Toyland look. When asked why they did this, they answered, "Why did people wear big ruffled neck pieces?" It was the style at the time. They also added a lot more color to the Down Under to further set it apart from the rest of the film. In the book, they had radioactive mutants called screamers. They couldn't afford to show them in the movie, so we only heard their screams and saw the glow. Now that filming was done and editing was complete, Ellison was invited to a screening. He refused. Finally, after numerous times, he agreed. Jones knew of Ellison's temper, so he scheduled a private screening for him. He sat quietly during the film, and at the end, got up and stormed towards Jones. Jones was sure he was going to punch him, but all he did was say, "That's the story I wrote," and left. A few days later, after thinking about it, Ellison called Jones. He said he was happy with the film except for the remarks made by Blood. He frequently called Quilla a cow and came off a lot more abusive towards her than how he was written. He insisted they re-record the dialogue and recut the film. Jones refused. For one, he didn't want to, but the other reason was he was out of money. Jones was convinced he was right, but Ellison persuaded him. He told him in order to redub the lines, it would cost about $1,500. Ellison thought about it and asked for any outtakes or other film that was cut from the movie. Jones gave him a bag of film from the editing room floor, and he went to the World Science Fiction Convention. He sold frames of the film anywhere from $1 to $5 and returned with enough for the edit. Jones redubbed the lines he requested, but refused to change the last line of the film. Ellison wanted to use the line from the book, while Jones wrote a new one. Jones wrote about 10 final lines before finally deciding on the perfect one. Despite Ellison yelling at him, he wouldn't budge. I have to agree with him. While Ellison's line works for the book, Jones's line works for the movie. No, I'm not showing the line, it's too perfect, and needs to be heard in context of the film. Jones sent the movie in for a rating, and it came back with a PG. He was shocked. Here was a film with violence, nudity, and foul language, receiving a PG. Beyond that, look at the foundation of the film. A guy is traveling around the wasteland with his telepathic dog looking for women to rape. Jones knew this was a terrible idea and insisted they change it to R. My, how things have changed. The movie didn't have a regular distributor. Jones distributed it through his company, and it did okay. He decided to re-release the movie in the 80s, where it gained more attention. He added in the nuclear explosions in the beginning, which weren't in the original cut. Jones wanted to make a sequel where a woman kills Vic and takes blood, but decided it was a bad idea. Women's groups in the 70s protested the movie, calling it misogynistic. Then when it was re-released in the 80s, they called it empowering. It went under the radar in the 90s, but was called misogynistic again in the 2000s. This frustrated Ellison. The story was written not to belittle women, but rather to show how atrocious the future could be. Vic wasn't meant to be a hero. His parents were killed when he was a child, and he never learned right from wrong. He was living according to his instincts for survival, which was food, shelter, and reproduction. That said, Ellison despises the last line of the film, calling it moronic, hateful, and chauvinistic. Because of its erratic distribution, the film wasn't commercially successful upon release, but it's gone on to be a major cult classic. The movies continue to find new fans over the years, and Jones heralds it as his finest work. Ellison continued the story of Vic and Blood with a prequel, and later, a 3-story graphic novel. The film's influenced even more than Mad Max. The creators of the Fallout series said the film heavily influenced the games. The vaults were directly inspired by the Down Under. In each game in the series, you can get a canine companion named Dogmeat. Dogmeat was what Vic called Blood as an insult. Wasteland, the game that inspired Fallout, also had elements from the movie. In the post-apocalyptic film The Book of Eli, a poster for A Boy and His Dog is clearly visible in a few scenes. The movie's often been referred to as the best science fiction film ever made. Tiger's performance was so good, he was almost nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. L.Q. Jones said the film was brilliant in its simplicity. Harlan Ellison said it's good, but he's still right about the ending.
I want popcorn. You said we'd get some.